for today and go ahead and show the slides. So one of the things that I'd like to do before we get started is, I'm gonna stop sharing 1 second, unplug my second screen, that I am only relying on the one. I'd like to start to get to know all of you a little bit. And so if you wouldn't mind in the chat, since we only have an hour, share your name, the county that you're in, and how do you know you are where you're meant to be right now? And it can't be because it's on your calendar. It can't be because your phone pinged you and told you to be here. How do you know you're meant to be in this space this morning? And one of the reasons that I'm asking you to share your county is because while you work as county teams, I want you to know that while I'm a resource, you also will become resources for each other as you go through this and as you have opportunities to come together and brainstorm. So let's see, who do we have in our room? And my favorite question is, how do you know where you're in the room that you're meant to be here? It's because there's reasons why you've taken this time out of your day. Margie, I can absolutely relate. No matter how you might try to change, it just happens. Lori, I am excited to be able to talk with you more.
Hey.
DJ, I love it. That love and the passion for the work, right? Really feeling like this is something you're meant to do, meant to be a part of. And it doesn't feel like work. It feels like it's just good stuff, good vibes.
Thank you.
Jessica, absolutely, I agree. It is an incredible opportunity to be able to do these, meet with your communities. Andrew, awesome. Belinda, absolutely. When we see where we come together, amazing, powerful things can happen. I love it. I love how caring and how your hearts are in this morning. Robert, wow, it is part of my life assignment. Love that. Al, I can relate with how doors open that you didn't really see coming. If you had told me way back when I went and was helping with my first community cafes here in my county of Cayuga County in Auburn, New York, I would not have told you that I would have then taken on leading it at the state level and then being able to offer these TOT trainings. Like, that was never in my wildest imagination, but I can't imagine being anywhere else. Valuable communication, getting the parents engaged. Exactly, Summer. Right now, that's super huge. Families have a lot going on. You all have a lot going on. So it's super important that we find ways where we can engage with our communities, help them realize that they're a part of this, that their voice matters, that they have an investment that they can be making back into their community. Human connection, exactly, Alyssa. Wonderful. Well, I am super stoked. Like, now just reading that, I'm like, oh, you guys are ready. All right, so let's dive in and start really thinking some more about the start and the beginning of this work. All of you have that start, the heart for families, the heart for communities. And when I think back to when I first started doing this work, it was because I was getting services in my community to help us as a family, to help my child to succeed. And I really knew that I needed more supports because the supports that I thought should be there and could be there weren't able to be there, weren't able to show up for us as a family in the way that we needed. And one of the things that we hear often is it takes a village to raise a child. It really takes a community to wrap its arms around families and each other that we can build and move forward in strong ways. And so as you start on this cafe journey, or if you have done this work before and now you're kind of recommitting, I encourage you to kind of find something that's your marker of your start place. Maybe it's a quote that you'll hold on to as you begin this work. Maybe it's a certain family that's you're thinking about or that's on the top of your mind as you're doing this work. Maybe it's a situation that you see in your community right now and you really hope something different can happen. And why I encourage you to do that is because at the start for us, we had providers that were trying to make spaces for our family so that we could give our child what he needed. And what we quickly learned is that it's not as easy as you think. And now, years later, we have a beautiful play space in our community that's dedicated for families just like that. The more exciting piece of that is not only did we get that established, but the play space has now bought its own building, and it is expanding bigger than ever before. And what is the core of it is the importance of community having these conversations, because it's from the community saying, we need this, that dream became a reality. And the core of all of this work is the children. We have to have our commitment to them and for them because we want them to have bright futures. They need us as community members to be there to not only support them, but to support their parents, support each other. Just be there and letting them know that there's that sense of human connection that many of you were kind of getting at in our welcoming chat. And so the community cafe is really grounded in what's called the World Cafe. And you might be like, well, Kara, you just said community cafe, what's World Cafe? So World Cafe is where this originated. And there's some guidelines, and this image was actually a handout that used to be on the tables when I first started doing community cafes. And I love it because it speaks to energy. It speaks to creativity. It encourages you to really think of, well, what could be? And you want to jump in somewhere, whether it's the having fun, maybe you're the person that loves to draw and doodle, maybe you're the person that's excited to be able to just listen. And what I encourage you to do as you think through the steam coming up from this coffee is notice the snail to the far right that says slow down so you have time to think and reflect. What's different about the World Cafe than just a normal conversation you could have with community members is it's not always about responding. Sometimes it's about just really stopping to hear what someone is saying and think on it. Have those spaces of silence. What's also important is that you speak with your mind and heart in this work. And with that, being sensitive to culture, bias, judgments that you might make if someone says that they're doing something a certain way with their child and you feel that it could be being done differently. Being open to ask the questions why. Being curious, really giving space to the conversation to really have growth happen as a collective. Really focusing in on what matters and listening to understand. And that's why it's important to think where your start space is. Because when we do the TOT with all of you, like I said, we're going to try to customize it to what is your goal for your community? What is your dream? Maybe you're still working on figuring that out, and that's absolutely fine because we're here to support you with that. But what's most important is we really want to encourage everyone to contribute your thinking. We want to have different ways for that to happen. I'll share a quick story. When we were doing community cafes here in Cuyahoga County, where I live in Auburn, there was an individual who walked into the cafe, didn't really say hi or anything when we welcomed them, followed our check-in procedure, and they proceeded to then sit off to the side of the room, away from everyone else. And you think, okay, well, that's kind of weird. Why were they staying off to the side, Kara? This individual wanted the warmth of that space. They wanted to have a sense of connection, but they didn't want it to feel forced. So as we enjoyed a meal together, we once in a while went over and just offered and said, would you like to join us? We offered if they needed something more to eat, something else to drink, and included them in their own way. Then when it came to conversation time, we did get up from tables and kind of stand, and we invited them to join, but we didn't pressure them. Because here's the funny thing. We don't know what everyone's walking in with when they come to these conversations. Someone could have had a really hard day. Someone could have been going through some trauma, some loss. For this individual, They just wanted to have the sense of connection from just listening. And so I encourage you to remember that as we go through this, that it's important to give space to everyone, but also recognize that some people just want to listen and soak it in. And why I say that is because while we have precious time, we want to also have opportunities where maybe someone goes home and thinks on something, and then they have thoughts, ideas, dreams. How are you going to hear those? Have you built a relationship somewhere with someone so that they know that this conversation doesn't end when the clock hits the hour mark? This conversation is just a beginning of hopefully many more to come. So I encourage you to think about that as you think through the coffee steam rising and recognize the many different opportunities where you can have conversations happen. So let's dive in and really get to understand what happened with this World Cafe. How did it even begin? Well, it started in 1995 in California. And what they decided was there's importance around conversation. They also recognize that there's some questions that need to kind of help steer or guide or kind of shape where the conversation goes. But what they found and what they realized is that when we put different people in groups together, different conversations happen, different ideas get shared. Sometimes somebody might hear something another individual shared and elaborate or even connect to something additional. And so they decided that it'd be important to have that happen a couple times. They chose the number 3. And so they figured have 3 rounds of conversation around one question, moving from table to table in between. And I know right now, for many of us, we're like, Kara, it's COVID times. How are you going to make this happen? Don't worry, we'll get there. But what's important as those conversations are happening is the links being made in between those rounds of ideas, the visuals that people draw on the table, and thinking of, do you like to take notes when you have somebody talking? Do you like to be able to record things? How do you kind of capture thoughts or ideas and hold on to them? Because that's important. That's how you commit to that conversation and remember it and can go back to it later. And so the World Cafe is really grounded on these principles for hosting conversations that matter. So I'm going to work you around the wheel. First and foremost is you have to set the context. Why are we even coming together? What is it that we're going to talk about, address? And one of the things that we found is that while it's okay to kind of have different conversations, there really needs to be something you're working towards together, where you're kind of going in deeper and where you have an opportunity for maybe someone who joins halfway through today's presentation. How are we going to catch them up and bring them up to speed? Same thing with your community conversations. What's the context? Where's the direction? Where's the vision? And that's where it's really important that you know who your partners are, because you want to be working together for a collective good. Next one is equally important, creating that hospitable space. How are you making it feel that any voice is represented and can be represented in that space? How do we address that if there's a possibility of bias? How do we feel a room and know that it's a safe place, a place where I can very vulnerably share struggles that I'm having as a mom, maybe in this very moment? How do we create that? And what I can share with you is that's part of the relationship building. That's what I call the not necessarily always on the hours piece of this work. It's getting to know the people, because as you're creating that space, people will get vulnerable, people will share, and sometimes be beyond the conversation, in the after part of the conversation, in the follow-up that you might do. And for some, maybe even in the beginning before you even start the conversation. We had that happen once. A mom literally was at the point where she couldn't keep her lights on and the heat on. It was winter. She needed support, and she felt safe in that space to participate, and then pulled us to the side and said, I don't know what to do. I'm really scared I'm going to lose my kids because I can't keep the lights and heat on. We were able to connect her with community resources. So as you think about that hospitable space, also really know what are the resources in your community, what's available, and recognize you don't have to have all the answers. Because guess who that mom came to? She came to me. And I'll be honest, I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? Like, I've never dealt with this before. I don't know who the right people are. And so recognize that. And in that space, I was able to be real with her and say, I don't know what I can do to help, but I do know that I would love to connect you with this person. And I did a warm connection, introduced who this person was, how that person has helped me as a mom, and said, she'll help you to find the right resources. And if you get stuck again, don't hesitate to let us know. It's important. Then it's really thinking of exploring questions that matter. Try not, as you're doing this work, to just ask questions or say, yep, we heard from our community. No, why are you asking the questions you're asking? What are you hoping to hear? What are you hoping to change? What are you hoping to have happen? Really sitting down, and I encourage people as they're asking those questions and as they're bringing those stakeholders together, having those stakeholders even take a look at those questions, give their input. Is there any challenges in the way that the question is worded? Is there a possibility that maybe someone won't feel like they can answer a question? What would those barriers be? How do we address those? And most importantly, as we ask those questions, encourage everyone's contributions, making sure everyone has an opportunity and a space to share. We all know there can be dominant people who can take over an entire conversation very, very quickly. It's where you need your hosts and your skilled facilitators to be able to say, it sounds like you have a lot more to share. I'd love if you could capture some of that in some notes or in a drawing for us, because I'd love to hear from a couple more people before we have to close out for today. Acknowledging they want to share, acknowledging that like drive that they have, but keeping it in a way that it doesn't overshadow someone else's opportunity to connect. And then there's that important piece of connecting diverse perspectives. What one person may see as a problem or a challenge, the other might not. They might see it as an opportunity. How do you make sure that those differing opinions can be respected? And part of that is that hospitable space where we set the tone that you may hear things that are different from your way of thinking. Doesn't mean yours or theirs is wrong. It's simply the differing pieces of information that our community brings to make our community as incredible as it is. Nobody wants a kind of rubber stamped community. We want it to have different thoughts, different visions. That's where the creativity can happen. And that's where you really have to listen together for insights. What are they sharing? What are the really big themes that came out from the different conversations that had? Were there similar thoughts that popped up for all the questions? Was there an overarching theme that captured the whole night? Really listening together for that and checking with your team. Did they feel the same thing? Did they hear something different? And then sharing the discoveries. There's nothing worse than giving feedback and then not knowing what happened to it. It just went. It was a great conversation. We all felt good and we went home and who knows what happened to all that. People like to know. Think of how are you going to share that information? Are you going to use the media and share out some of what happened? Are you going to actually invite them into the space and encourage them to be a partner? What are you going to do to help share that information out? And so as we think about that, it's really about conversational leadership. And so when we think about conversational leadership, it's really about having purpose and strategic intent. All of you have done that already. That's how you got connected to NYSPEP. You had purpose and strategic intent. And then what we have to do is really go through these layers of the circle. We have to look at critical issues and questions. We have to think of who are all the key stakeholders. And here's the secret I'm going to tell you about those key stakeholders. Some of those key stakeholders could actually include some of the older youth. Just before we started this conversation, Margie shared something about something her child shared, and we're all like, whoa, like that's incredible. Youth have so much to share. Encourage them to be a part of that conversation if it's appropriate. Think of who are the partners, who are the stakeholders, and don't be afraid to ask the question, is anyone missing? Also, really taking a look at the collaborative social technologies. How are we really allowing everybody to engage? In this regard, thinking through too of people who might have disabilities, people who might not speak English as a first language. How are you going to address that? One year when I first started and was actually learning the community cafe training from Robin Haga, we went down to the city and we did bilingual training. And it was like unreal because she's like, Kara, you gotta learn to talk with fewer words because you gotta give space for the other person to be able to translate. And I was like, okay. And so that was something we had to learn, something we had to develop. And so think about what are some of those opportunities where you could have others with different languages still be a part of your community cafe? Who are the people you would need to make that happen? Or even those that might be hard of hearing. Think of how do you create that open space? Because at the core is conversation and sharing. And how do we invite that? And then when we have those issues identified, we have those stakeholders, and we are building out of what is this going to look like, that's when we move to the collective intelligence and wise action. And you can learn more by checking out that website, and we'll make sure to get you the slides after today's presentation so you can read more about that. But this is really kind of how the World Cafe got going. Then comes the Community Cafe. That is where Robin Haga, who was at the time living in Washington State, really appreciated the World Cafe. She liked it. She's like, wow, this is something that could be powerful in the community. But she's like, I want something more. And as she thought about what she could do with the Community Cafe, she's like, protective factors. They're really important. Research, supports. These are 5 things families need. I gotta get those in there. And then she was like, you know what? It's great to ask questions and problem solve. But what if we really took the opportunity to appreciate our community, come at it from a strengths-based place, from a place of saying what's strong in our community and how do we build on it, instead of what's wrong and how do we fix it. And that is one of the reasons why I absolutely love this work, because it shifted how we looked at things. It shifted how I approached working in my community. It shifted how I parent my own 2 kids. And one of the reasons that that happened is because of the protective factors. This is an infographic. As Tamaya shared, I work with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, and I sit on their parent council, the Alliance National Parent Partnership Council. And last April, we wanted to create an infographic that communities could use and spur them to action. And so you'll see protective factors embedded in different pieces of this infographic. And when I was working on this with a team of parents, I was like, how do we show that like protective factors aren't just things you check off? They're things that we live. They're a part of our everyday, our every moments. And that's how this was able to get pulled together. And for me, that's what the Community Cafe is. It's not just this great conversation we had and we came together. It's what gets your wheels spinning. It's what moves you from a community that's like, we gotta do something, but we just don't know what it's gonna be, or how are we gonna get this to have some action under it? This is what the Community Cafe does for you. So I encourage you, really start thinking of how are we gonna get the wheels spinning as we talk a little more about the Community Cafe. And so the Community Cafe approach, as I shared, is a practice of really designing meaningful conversation that will spark leadership, to build relationships, to strengthen families. It means sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone. Also, as I shared, it's about the appreciative inquiry process. So we'll go over that a little bit so that way you can understand that kind of shift in thinking. And it's grounded in the World Cafe principles. That's why way back when I was doing this in my local community and first started, the World Cafe was a part of it. I had to understand that there were different pieces that were pulled from that to help shape what the Community Cafe is all about. So talking about appreciative inquiry, this is one of my most favorite things. So we start with a strategic focus, the discovery, what gives it life, the best of what is, it's appreciating. So hopefully all of you, as you've been getting ready to gear this up, are looking at your community of what gives your community life. Appreciate what is going well. Appreciate what is going well during COVID. Because one thing that we can all say, COVID's taught us a lot. It's taught us a lot about ourselves, our communities, our families. But as you're thinking about doing the Community Cafe, what is really giving your community life? And then that's the next fun part. You get to dream what could be. Anyone who spends enough time with me will tell you this is like the bubble that I probably live, eat, breathe, and sleep. What could be? It's envisioning the possible. It's innovating. It's always thinking what could be next. And I know for some, as we think about that dreaming stage, we're like, well, there's budgets. Or Kara, there's red tape with that. There's going to be like so many approval processes that have to happen. Yes, it doesn't mean like live in a Pollyanna rainbow and sunshine world and pretend all that's gone. No, it's just dreaming, thinking about what really could be, what could really happen if we got people together from diverse perspectives, talking and looking at our community in a strengths-based way. What could really be? Share a quick story with that. So when we started with community cafes in my community, my kiddos were little. Then my son was getting ready to go off into school. And when it was an opportunity to start looking at him going off to school, I was like, can we bring community cafes here? And I was nervous. I didn't think the schools would buy into it or think it was good, but I dreamed what could be. And sure enough, I was able to meet with leadership and we were able to get community cafes going at our school. Then, as we all know, report period comes, right? And in the report period, they had a question, what's next for us? And we're like, well, we just conquered like doing a school-wide community cafe through the intercom system, grades K through 6, in different small groups, talking about things. And why is it hard to ask for help? How do we make it easier in our school? We're like, what more could we dream? And we're like, we need to make this district-wide. And it got put into our parent engagement plan. So I encourage you, as you dream, don't think you're dreaming too big. Don't think your dream will never happen. It took time. The play space took time. My kids are to the point now where they're too old, but that will always be home because they know at the core of that building is them. It's why they've known about it for so long. It's why they helped talk about what could be in it. They helped dream. Think of who those people could be to help you really stretch yourself. And then we hit that next part, the reality part, the designing. What should be? Building the ideal, understanding things might have to shift or change, or it might be a no right now, but maybe later on down the road, it could be turned to a maybe, and then even maybe a yes. So I encourage you, that's why you dream really, really big, because even if you can't do the whole dream, chances are you can do a small part. And remember, small but significant really impacts families. It really makes a difference. And then it encourages others to come in because they hear their voice, they see their voice being heard. And they're like, I want to be a part of that. Because that's when you deploy. What will be? Executing with excellence, sustaining it. How do we make sure that it keeps going? One of the pieces I'll talk a little bit about today, but we'll be doing some deeper work with each of you, is that deploying part of how do you really engage parents in this? Parents are busy, parents are crazy. I so often hear, Kara, not all parents are like you. Not everybody wants to be a part of all this stuff. They don't got time for it. I agree. But all parents do care about their kids and they do care about their community. And that's why they need many different opportunities where they can be a part of deploying at different spaces or discovering, dreaming, or designing. But notice at the core is positivity, looking at things in a strengths-based way, looking at families in a strengths-based way, looking at systems in a strengths-based way. Systems exist for a reason, even if they drive us crazy at times. There's a reason they're there. And we have to fix and work together on how do we make things change and shift. How do we really invest our time, our energy in the most positive ways we can? And then we come to my favorite piece, the protective factors. And why this is my favorite piece is because I was asked when we first started to talk about the protective factors. There was a sheet, you'll see it in the toolkit you get on TOT day. It had stones on it, it had each protective factors, and I was like, I don't know what that is. I know it's important because you have it on every single table, but I don't know how to describe that. Like, that's just the 5 things. Like, you say they're important, so here we go. And then I went through train the trainers with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, really understanding what protective factors mean, really understanding what it means to put it in action. And I was super excited because I got to meet Maureen from Michigan, and her parent group created this to help them remember protective factors. It has stuck to me like glue. My family, including my children, can tell you that they know the protective factors, and they will use it against me and say, if I'm having a rough mommy moment, is that part of the 5-finger thingy? But protective factors are 5 things research shows that families need, regardless of where they're at in life, what they're going through. And so I bring this into the training every single time, because this could be the one thing that makes a difference. Because I can tell you that on my challenging days, the days I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling like I haven't done my best as a mom, as a worker, as a trainer, this is what I go to. And I'm like, what is it that is off for me right now? So we're going to jump through them pretty quickly, but I encourage you to think through. If you give a kid a thumbs up, show me a thumbs up. I can see some of you on camera. Show me a thumbs up. Ooh, there we go. We got people showing me thumbs. It's a good feeling, right? If somebody gives you a thumbs up, that's kids' social emotional competence. That's them knowing how they communicate their feelings, their emotions, how they can say them and label them, how they can work through them. So that's the first one, and think of how important that is for our little guys who sometimes don't even know what those emotions are. All they know is they're feeling off, helping them figure that out. To even our teenagers who are feeling a whole lot of feels right now. We have to work through that with them. Social emotional competence, helping them work through it, those emotions, those feelings, labeling them, finding appropriate coping mechanisms. Next one, point finger. That, show me, I can see your cameras. Show me if you got your pointer finger. Think about if somebody told you you're number one. How does that make you feel? Pretty good, right? You're like, yeah, they're seeing me. That is what parents sometimes need to be told. You're number one. You are your child's first teacher. No one says you have to know everything. No, there is no guidebook that will explain every child, even though there really should be one. And if you have more than one child, you sometimes need multiple books, multiple tools, and multiple anything to help get you through some days. But you're your child's first teacher. That doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but it does mean that you come with knowledge. And think of the word knowledge. It doesn't mean you magically have to know everything. That's something that's always growing. You're always building. And that's why NYSPEP is so important. The parenting education piece, parents need different tools, different pieces of information. And sometimes I don't want somebody to say to me, Kara, are you having a hard parenting day, or are you struggling? I just want you to say, hey, have you ever heard about this? And giving it that buffer. So I don't have to kind of admit that maybe I'm really struggling. Next one, don't hold him up alone. I can see you in the cameras. Middle guy, hold him up with his buddies, side by side. There we go. This is important because this is your social connections. And right now during COVID, our social connections have been like this. We haven't been able to see people, hug people, love on people like we normally would. But what's important is even while our social connections are like this, is we need them to be positive. We need them to be encouraging. We need them to build us up, especially right now during COVID. Thinking through the people who can sometimes call us and it feels like a drain because it's let me tell you all that's wrong and let me tell you what I'm struggling with, and you don't hear any positivity. I encourage you finding those positive people who can lift you up, listen for a little bit of that, but then help you shift and think of what's one good thing that happened today. Even if it's simply you got to take a shower in peace, that's huge. Next one, parental resilience. And this was one that completely changed my world because I thought resilience was always bouncing back, saying, yep, I'm good, and putting on the smile and pretending everything was good, even when it was falling apart around me. What I learned from going through this deeper is that resilience is a commitment to yourself. It's thinking about that ring being on your finger. You're committing to yourself that you'll be strong. It's committing to yourself that you will be there, even if the road gets hard, And what's going to happen is, while it's not going to feel good and it's not going to be easy, you're going to stay tied to yourself of, I'm going to get through this. Because as a result of that, you're going to get changed. You're going to get transformed in some cases. So really thinking through, how do we tell parents? Sometimes just going through the really, really hard, you're okay, because you have the other supports there to help keep you strong. You have the other supports in those moments that will get you through to the other side. And if the other side is not always a minute away, an hour away, or even a day away. For some, it can be weeks or months, but we're going to hold you tight. We're going to connect you with the community and help you get to the other side. Because then it comes the pinky, the concrete support in times of need. Everyone at some point in their life needs support, whether it's really intensive support or even just a little bit of support. It's the recognizing of that everyone needs support. But in those moments when you do need it, whether it's big or small, you need it then. You need to know that there's a concrete way of meeting that on the other side of things. Not that there's a long wait list. Not that you've called the number 100 times and no one's picked up the phone. No, there's a real support on that end. So that is why this is so important, is because as we're having conversations, we can help parents, community members, even ourselves, understand what protective factor are you kind of hitting at right now? What are you talking about? Helping them realize that protective factors aren't an additional thing. It's an intentional thing of how you go about working throughout your day. It's thinking through all of those pieces. And so why would you use a cafe? Well, because you want to be able to share knowledge, possibilities for real life issues and questions. You want to be engaging people who could be meeting for the very first time in a real conversation. For some, maybe even right now for your communities, especially because of COVID, it's about deepening relationships, reconnecting, helping your community to figure out, what does reopening even look like? How does that even work? How do we start functioning back together? It's about building collective wisdom and really inviting each person to contribute. How are you going to do it with COVID? Here's what I told you. We got some tips. You can hold virtual cafes using Zoom and breakout rooms. With the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, one of the things that we do is carrying conversations every Monday for our parent networks. And we do it through Zoom with breakout rooms, and they are tight like a family. It took time, but we were able to do that, and we will help you figure that out. You can also hold socially distanced cafes in larger spaces with limited participants, if that's something that works for your community. You also can use social media to get conversations going. So I encourage you, start small and build as you go. Don't feel like you have to jump in the deep end and just magically figure it all out. One great tool to use is this tool that the Alliance National Parent Partnership Council created due to COVID, which is Conversations for a Better Normal. This is a guide that has questions that you can use, printables that you can have, PowerPoint that you can use with questions you can start in your community tomorrow if you wanted. So I encourage you to check out that resource. It's a great one that you could be using. And think about, what is your role in this? What do you want to see change? What do you want to help fit into place for your community? We already know why you're all here. It's your heart and dedication to your communities, to your families, to even your vision for what it is you feel your role in life is. Really think through, what are you going to do during this community cafe process? Are you going to be the person helping to get people to show up? Are you going to be the person who organizes? Are you going to be the cheerleader for your team when things get hard? There's all sorts of roles for everyone. And so what does that TOT training look like? And that's a picture of my adorable little Ellie when we first started. And this is important because notice, where's my child? Not often childcare, not away from me. She didn't want to leave mommy. She stayed with me, and I'll be honest, she was awesome. And both of my children could probably help teach a TOT because they've walked through so many cafes together with me. But what it is in the morning, we set the stage, give you a little bit of background, and then I put you through what is called a community cafe experience. That's why I'm going to really spend some time setting up meetings to meet with each of your communities, get a feel for what's on your hearts, your minds, because the questions I ask there are going to be tied to you and your community. They're not going to be random ones I pulled from the air. Then at the end, we'll harvest, which means I'll hear what all came out, and I'll write up some notes and send you thoughts and give you some action steps. Because then in the afternoon, we walk through the steps of hosting. We talk about designing questions, what your invitation can look like, how you can set things up, other supports, and most importantly, action. How do we make sure this keeps the wheels spinning? So I encourage you thinking through when you're wanting to ask questions. As you get ready for the TOT, you probably have a lot of questions swirling in your mind. I want you to know we are here for you through it all. I encourage you, if you're starting to think of questions you'd love to have your community answer, start writing them down somewhere. If there's one thing I've learned, the importance of writing things down, because I'm a dreamer, like I said, I always have lots of ideas, but if I don't commit it to paper, I can sometimes lose it. So make sure you're committing it to paper, even if it's tons of sticky notes. And all of this is about really creating that mind shift for your community. Who are the partners? Who are the voices? Really making sure you're not leaving someone out. Recognizing who could you ask? Could it be grandparents? Could it be law enforcement? Could it be schools, child welfare workers? There's so many different partners. Think of who is realistic to start with and recognize you don't have to have everybody from the beginning or it falls apart. You have to have key partners at the beginning and then build out from there. More voices will want to come. And what does being a partner in your group really mean? What does that look like for them? What is their role? It's important to think of that because they'll ask. They'll say, well, what are you asking of me? And the most important thing is to understand your why, because your why is where you will really thrive. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about for parents. Why are they even engaged? Why is it important to build partnerships with them? It's because families are the center of a kid's life. Working gives them a more holistic view of how to support and strengthen families. If families are involved, it can double positive odds for kids in so many areas. And why do we even get involved? Because it's important. It's something that I can contribute to, and I feel I'm going to be listened to and respected. And I feel like it's actually going to make a difference that I was there. But remember, I said, not all parents are like me. They don't want to be totally in it. They have small windows of opportunity. So how do they stay involved? Give them lots of different opportunities. You get a no today, that does not mean a no next week. It does not mean a no tomorrow. Feel like you can always keep that door open and ask. That's where you're doing that intentional relationship building. It can be small, it can be large. Hear from them, learn what their talents are, where they're good at, what they shine at. We need advance notice, especially right now because life is just chaos. And sometimes parents also really appreciate support with childcare, a gas card, maybe also just being able to be invited to the TOT to learn. That's a benefit, and it doesn't cost extra. And we can stay involved when our ideas are supported and respected. We don't get retribution because we say, that didn't work for us. We're just being real. It's also feeling like we have an impact and we feel like we're actually appreciated. So how do you get started with parents? If you haven't already, ask them what they want and need from your program. Also, frame it in terms of protective factors. What's hard right now for you as a parent? How can we be more welcoming? How can we make it easier? And what do parents think when you ask them about their role and their voice? This is my favorite because I put it out to lots of parents all over. And they said it gives children the keys to their chosen futures. It's endless limits. It's an opportunity to model commitment to your children, your family, your community, and yourself. It gives every child a foundation of love and support for a future they deserve. Each child the confidence to believe they can conquer the world, the strength to find so many opportunities. So what are you going to do? As you leave today, I want to put action to your wheels. I want you to think of what are ways you can engage parents in your community. Think of where parents are at laundromats. Think of where parents go shopping. Think of schools. Think of programs that have opened up or are hosting virtual classes, because guess what? They're reaching families. What are the barriers you're going to need to cross? And how is the idea of engaging and involving parents going to change your community? Think through those questions, and they're in the slide deck for you to really kind of look through. Think through, what are your topics? Think through questions. What will your cafe include? Partners. Where will you hold the cafe? What work are you building on? What already exists? These are things I'm going to be talking to you about. That's why I put them here. But as we close for today, I want you to help me with your vision. What is your hope or dream for the community that you're here with today? What's your hope or dream? What would you love to see happen? As all of you are sharing, I'm going to share with you what we call a beautiful ending in the cafes. And this is something that has been a part of my cafes and has come to mean more and more every year. And it was taken from the presentation of the 2011 World Forum on Early Care and Education. Lillian Katz shared a concern from her book, Intellectual Emergencies, Some Reflections on Mothering and Teaching. She says, I believe that each of us must come to care about everyone else's children. We must come to see that the well-being of our own individual children is intimately linked to the well-being of all other people's children. After all, when one of our children needs life-saving surgery, someone else's child will perform it. When one of our children is threatened or harmed by violence in the streets, someone else's child will inflict it. The good life for our own children can only be secured if it is also secured for all other people's children. But to worry about all other people's children is not just a practical or strategic matter. It is a moral and ethical one. To strive for the well-being of all other people's children is also right. There's a lot in that, but a lot to think on, a lot to appreciate. And Tamaya is going to drop our evaluation link in the chat for you. Just a few quick questions if you wouldn't mind filling it out. And I'm going to stop sharing, but I will show you. You have my contact information at the last slide. Let's see if there's any questions as we wrap up today. I'm going to start reading some of those dreams. Ooh, you guys are awesome. Stronger relations. Helping kids be kids, recognizing the importance and role of play, right? For parents to feel supported. Robert, thank you for elevating fathers. Remind me when I come to your community, I want you to elevate that specifically, because I will share a personal story about fathers. Never thought of it in a million years, but a really powerful story. And if other communities want to hear it, you let me know. But any questions? I'm loving these visions of what you all have. Restoring fathers into the family unit. So true. Jessica, it'll be in the slide deck, and there'll be a link to the Michigan Families work, because they actually have individual posters for each of the 5 protective factors. It's absolutely amazing work that they've done in Michigan. Margie, absolutely. As follow-up, what I'll probably do to make it a little easier for all of you, I'm going to send slide deck. And then I'm also going to send a separate one pager with all of the links and the titles. So that way you can easily just kind of click on the links and go through those. All right, well, if you're not going to ask me questions, then I'm going to spoil Robert and give him a really good story. All right, so here's a story about fathers. I have an amazing husband. He worked the night shift, and I was primarily the one who was raising our kids, just because of the way his work schedule was. I was traveling for the Alliance, and I was in a completely different state, really far away. There's no way I could jump in a car to get home. And one of my children went into crisis. probably the worst, most scariest moment of my life as a mom. And all I wanted to do was be there, like in my house with my child at that very moment. I was crying. I was a disaster. My husband, when I talked to him, was like, I've got this. And I'm like, but you don't, like, you've never helped him with this before. And I really didn't think he could do it. I'll be honest. I was very fortunate in that moment that I had met two dads that I had a really close relationship with nationally. And they challenged me and they said, have you ever given him the opportunity to? I said, well, no. I'm like, but he won't do it right. Like, he'll probably say something and make it 5 times worse. And they're like, how do you know that? And I said, well, because he just hasn't. Like, this isn't his thing. Like, this is my wheelhouse. I know what would help. And he said, I'm challenging you. In this moment, your hardest moment as a mom, I want you to step back. He's like, you may call and check in, but before you do, you have to call me first. And they held me accountable to giving my husband that space. I'll be honest with you, that was the greatest gift that could have ever been given to our family. My husband's confidence of being able to step into places and areas for my children has grown through the roof. The relationship he can now have with his children is very different. And I didn't realize that I was getting in the way of that until I was in that crisis moment. Not everybody has somebody who can tell you and hold you accountable to step back and step aside. But I can tell you, he got my son through that moment. And I was able to come home and not have to be dealing with that crisis because he resolved it. He was there for his son in a way that was huge. And so for me, bringing up the importance of fathers, even though I'm a mom, it's letting moms know it's okay if it's different, because it was. Was it the best? I can't tell you yes or no, but I can tell you that gift of space and time gave him a gift with his children that he probably otherwise would never have had.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Cara. Thank you. That's just such a great story. And the way you shared it and that vulnerability is really a big part of making these cafes and bringing community together, is being able to tell your story. And I appreciate your story because it helps a lot of people just now on what you just did. So I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. It's this work. And if I hadn't started with community cafes in my community way back when, I never would have met those two gentlemen. I never would have the resource of the 5-finger thingy on my hard parenting days. And so my hope and my vision for the work moving ahead is that I can impart some small gift to each of you that are doing this work and to your community members, because that is what this work is about. It's the gifts we can share amongst each other. So thank you all so much for your time. I can't wait to get to know each of you more. And please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I can do.
I will stick the link to the evaluation again in the chat so that y'all have it. And so, Cara, would you like us to send out all of those okay, so why don't you get those to us and then we can send it out to the whole group who was here today.
Perfect.
So we have that email list and we'll get those out to you this week. All right.
All right. Thanks, Jessica, for what you shared.
This is like, if Reggie was here, he would have been like, yeah,
I know.
at your story, right, Carrie? Yeah, and Belinda, like, we are on these meetings with Reggie and he'll go, big celebrations when we hear fatherhood stories.
It's
Yes,
huge.
and I just want to thank you. I want to thank you too, because that was an awesome testimony. I sent, a note on the chat to you, but this is my heart for the community. I believe this is my destiny to also, like Bob, to help fathers be restored in the family unit. And so I'll be the cheerleader today for the fathers, because that's what we need. The fathers haven't been in the home because we've displaced them. And your testimony was awesome. Thank you.
You're really welcome. All right, well, I hope everyone takes care. Let us know if there's questions, things you need after you get the handouts. If you're like, Kara, is there anything else like this? You let me know. I want to stock you up with lots of great things. And I will tell you, I will even put in a special additional little link to what is called a toolkit. And when you click on that, you're going to find amazing resources. They'll just like blow your mind. So know that
Great.
that's going to get snuck in there too, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
And Kara, one more thing. So next steps for all of the coalitions, right? So what we should talk about probably and let you know is we're working with Kara to schedule the training of trainers for each of your communities. And then we will also provide an opportunity for a pre-meeting for you to talk through any questions you might have, for Kara to give you some kind of community specific guidance that might be helpful ahead of the training of trainers. So no, that's not a mandatory requirement, but it is an offer that Kara has made. So so know that that exists as well. And Kara, feel free to jump in if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, we just want to make sure that when I am giving you that training for your community, that we have that as modeled for what works for your stakeholders, what works for your vision. And we will work it and tweak it until it is exactly what you need it to be. So I look forward to being able to think through that with all of you. And please don't hesitate to reach out with questions or other thoughts.
Do we know if it's going, do we know if it's going to be in person or virtual, or are we playing it by ear?
Right now, I'm thinking it's going to be virtual because we'd like to get you the training of trainers sooner rather than later, so that you can get your cafes planned. I think, you know, what we heard last year, because of COVID, there were so many moving pieces, and, you know, we all thought it was going to be like 3 weeks, right? And so I think as we kind of transition from that limbo state of not knowing how long we were going to be staying home to acceptance that this was our temporary reality, that training got pushed out to the fall for folks. And that put a lot of pressure on communities to get their cafes scheduled. And so we want to make sure that we listened to feedback that we got from those communities. And so we want to provide this training of trainers opportunity for you earlier in your year with NYSPEP rather than closer towards mid-year. So because of that, I think it's going to dictate that it'll be virtual.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, Kara, again, many thanks. Thank you. Thank you. We are lucky to be able to partner with you. So no, we appreciate you. And thank you to everyone who joined today. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. But you'll be hearing from DJ and me soon. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.